Hello, welcome to the results presentation webinar, The Benefits of Hyper-Utilization of Consumer Energy Resources. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands I'm hosting this webinar from. That's the Ghana people here in Adelaide and also the traditional custodians of the lands of everybody joining us from around Australia. First off, a very big thank you to all those who volunteered to participate in this research. We can only study your data with your participation, that is, your energy consumption behavior, and we use this to try and answer some very important research questions. I would first of all like to thank Energy Consumers Australia for funding this research, a public interest effort. So we wouldn't be here without their generous support. There are also a lot of people who have contributed to this effort, a lot of organizations as well, particularly Quantum Energy, WinZero, our community partners, Rethink Sustainability, Enosi, who provided the software and the product that backs it all up, Deakin University and the University of Queensland for actually doing all the research, staffing this and providing endless support to everything, and also everybody who's just been passionate about this. Without that effort, we just wouldn't have gotten this off the ground.
Very much, PK. I don't just mean for handing over, but a big thanks also to PK and the entire project team. If we have any participants here today and you've ever emailed the Venn Deakin inbox, you may well have gotten a reply from PK, who is one of our Venn users and Venn experts and a key member of the project team. So thank you very much, PK. As PK mentioned, this has been an ambitious project that was funded by Energy Consumers Australia, who are also a collaborator on the project. But it's been a project with Deakin University, where I work, in partnership with Quantum Energy, Rethink Sustainability, WinZero, the amazing community group in the Windsor-Carriby area, without whom this project idea wouldn't have kicked off, at least my involvement in it. The University of Queensland as a research partner, and of course, we couldn't have done it without the software that facilitated the study, and that's Powertracer from Enosi. So lots of thanks there, and of course, big thanks also to our participants, and I'll come back to that at the end as well. So just to set the scene, and I'm sure none of this information is new to many in the audience, we in Australia have been substantial adopters of technology in the energy market and even in the residential sector. So we've been incredibly successful at adopting rooftop solar. And the numbers keep changing. I can't keep track of them, but around 1 in 3 detached homes at present now has solar panels, which means that households collectively and small businesses already own an enormous amount of energy infrastructure in Australia. But there's an important challenge, and that's that these are individual decision makers who all make decisions independently of each other. And they include when to use electricity, how much they're going to be exporting, when to charge their batteries or their vehicles, and when to use appliances. And when millions of decision makers are each making those decisions separately, we can end up with some sort of negative consequences of those kind of independent decisions. So, for example, we might have too much electricity being used or exported into the network at particular points in time or at particular locations of the network. And that can result in congestion, it can result in damage to network infrastructure, and it can also just mean that energy is being wasted. It's not being used when it could have been used. And the purpose, in part, what this study is about is understanding how much of that problem can we resolve, not necessarily by adopting more devices, things like batteries and other hardware, but how much does coordination of those individual decision makers actually help with that potential problem? So we, in combination with all of those fantastic partners, have undertaken the Virtual Energy Network study, and that has used the software Powertracer from Enosi, which is being offered as a retail product or as part of a retail plan by Energy Locals retailer. So to understand whether coordination amongst these individual decision makers might help in the energy market and in the energy transition, we use this software to create what we call a virtual energy network in the real world. So our real world trial involved around about 300 sites. Those sites were all using Powertracer from Enosi. And so that software basically is the coordination mechanism for these groups, for these individual decision makers. So rather than households just acting completely independently, the virtual energy network essentially enables coordination through trading. So, for example, one household who has rooftop solar and is producing more electricity in the middle of the day can trade that electricity with their neighbor at a cheaper rate than that neighbor would ordinarily buy their power by. So, for example, if that household is charging an electric vehicle or heating hot water, they can pay a lower rate for that electricity via trading in the virtual energy network. So that has benefits both to the seller, so the person who has that excess rooftop solar, and also to the buyer if they can time their consumption of their appliances to make the most of the energy that's being produced by that rooftop solar panel. So importantly for us, the study that we undertook is not purely an observational study or, for example, a before-after comparison. In fact, what we've done is we've created a randomized control trial, which is really one of the strongest or gold standard ways to understand whether some sort of intervention or change in a market or an institution actually leads to a causal effect. And that's why things like randomized control trials are used, for example, to test the efficacy of vaccines, because they're the gold standard for evaluation. So households and small businesses who joined the study were randomly assigned to start trading on Powertracer at different times. So we had a group who had early access to VEN trading and a group who experienced an extended baseline and it got to start trading a little bit later. And the fact that we had what we call a treatment group and a control group at the same time, we could observe these two different types of sites, enables us to really reliably isolate the impact of having access to these types of trades and distinguish it, make sure we're not biasing our estimate of the impact of the VEN due to other changes happening at the same time. So, for example, households moving or weather or any other things that might be occurring at the same time. So we use this methodology with our 296 sites so that we could credibly estimate the impacts of the virtual energy network. So what were our research questions? We had 4 research questions. The first is who participates in the VEN? What are the characteristics of consumers who are interested to participate in this kind of coordination or virtual energy network? The second is, do sites benefit? And if so, by how much and who? Third, can a virtual energy network improve the utilization of consumer energy resources like rooftop solar? And does it potentially create broader network benefits, so savings in the costs of operating the network? And finally, we were also interested to understand, does participation in this kind of system actually change how people feel about the energy transition itself? So to answer the first question, when we were enrolling people in our study, and if we have, again, participants here, you might recall, we asked a number of different questions to measure characteristics of people who were interested in participating in the VEN. What we also did is we used a survey provider to measure the same characteristics of what we would call a representative sample of Australian households. We focused on households because they were the majority of the sites in our study, but not exclusively. So what we did is then we can compare the characteristics of those interested in participating in the VEN. So in this slide, the VEN participants, to the characteristics of this representative sample using survey data that we collected using this survey platform. On average, the characteristics of the people in our study do look a little different to the characteristics of the people in this representative samples. For example, we had a higher share of people with rooftop solar interested to join the study or actually join the study, a higher number who had home batteries, for example. Similarly, a higher number with electric vehicles, a higher share of homeowners, and a reasonably high level of household income. Now, that does mask some differences. So, for example, if we focus just on the participants in our study who didn't have rooftop solar, we see that the numbers are much more similar to our representative sample. Still a little different, but for example, if we look at homeowners, for example, among participants in our study that did not have rooftop solar, we see a lower share are homeowners, which suggests that we were able to engage and involve renters who might not otherwise be able to install rooftop solar and access CER type technologies themselves into the study. But nevertheless, overall, for the study, we were still attracting those who were relatively highly resourced and highly engaged. So thinking about the feasibility of this kind of institution in the long term, we need to focus on designing recruitment pathways for other types of consumers to be able to participate. Okay, so that was who participated. The second question we wanted to understand is, does a virtual energy network benefit participants and how large are these benefits? So as I said, we had around 300 participants in the site. We had both generating sites and importing sites. So for the participants in our study, the average shared benefit for a unit of electricity that's traded between a generating site and an importing site is around 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's the magnitude of the potential benefit for both buyers and sellers in our study. So that 12 cents a kilowatt hour in the study was actually split equally so that we shared the benefit across both sides of that trade. And we see in our data clear evidence from the Powertracer platform, which records all prices paid and received for generating sites and importing sites. We see clearly that generators received higher effective prices for the solar that they exported, and similarly, buyers paid significantly lower effective prices for imported electricity. Now, if we think about the kind of ratios of how much energy was traded for these sites, we see that sellers, so those who have rooftop solar, was trading about 40% of their exports in total, and the remainder was sold back to the retailer at their usual feed-in tariff rate. That would be higher, for example, if we had a higher share of importing sites. So as I said earlier, over 60%, approximately 2/3 of our participants did have generation. So clearly, the more importing sites, non-generating sites that we have, the higher share of trade those sellers could expect. Similarly, buyers in our study were purchasing about 40% of their imports from their trading partners in the study. The remainder was purchased from the retailer. Now, that is not because of a lack of generation. As I said, we had plenty of generation in the study. The remaining 60% is typically almost 100% of it is occurring outside the hours where we have substantial amounts of electricity being generated from rooftop solar, i.e. not in the middle of the day, but in the evening and overnight. In terms of the types of benefits, we found that different sites benefit differently from experiencing the virtual energy network. So when we break our sample into two different groups, we look at small users and relatively large users, what we see is two very different types of benefits from the virtual energy network. So the first, the smaller users, we see that they tend to benefit by shifting their electricity consumption, by using more electricity when they have this cheap solar available. So they use more electricity consumption in response to the virtual energy network in the middle of the day. So that for them, the behavioral impact of the virtual energy network is where they receive most of the benefits. The large users, on the other hand, large users' benefits are driven more by purely having access to cheaper power. So while they have cheaper power in the middle of the day, that doesn't affect how much they use electricity or when they use electricity. They purely benefit by having access to lower prices. So overall, we see that smaller users benefit by changing their behavior, while larger users benefit just purely because they have access to cheaper power. The third research question is, does a virtual energy network improve the utilization of consumer energy resources for us, particularly rooftop solar, and lead to network benefits? So to summarize the findings of the trial in this dimension, what we find is a substantial increase in electricity imports from buyers during high solar availability periods. So we find that access to these virtual energy network trades increases imports by these non-generating participants by about 18% during these peak kind of solar availability hours. And that's a pretty substantial increase in imports from the sites in our study. For some in the study, that increase is actually more. So 18% is the average across different types of sites in our study. But we see higher elasticity or a bigger increase from those, for example, who are smaller sites, as I already indicated. We see a bigger response from renters in the study and those who have specific types of appliances. So electric vehicle owners and homes with electric hot water. So what we see is that these financial signals, this coordination mechanism, does meaningfully change the electricity consumption of those who are importing electricity, who don't have rooftop solar themselves. And that's a really fantastic and exceptionally robust finding of the study. So the final research question that we were trying to address is, does participating in a virtual energy network change consumer attitudes towards the energy transition? And so to try and understand to what extent this was the case, we actually asked our participants to reflect on certain characteristics of or their perceptions of the energy market. Because we have this randomized control trial where we had some people who had early access to the VEN and some people who had later access to VEN, and that was randomly assigned, it wasn't based on the characteristics of those individuals, we're able to understand the causal effect of the virtual energy network on consumer attitudes. What we find is that having access to this type of trading did actually increase perceptions of fairness about the extent to which the energy market is fair. So we ask participants questions about their perception that the energy system is fair to households like you, and we saw a 13% increase from those who had earlier access to the virtual energy network. So that suggests that well-designed market mechanisms do more than just help the grid. They actually improve perceptions and increase social trust. So overall, they're the answers to the 4 research questions that we set out to answer in the study. I think a high-level finding is that although there are technological fixed hardware solutions to some of the challenges in the electricity market, there are also huge potential gains from coordination mechanisms that utilize existing hardware. So in thinking about what else as a researcher, there's always a new set of questions. So thinking about what else we might like to understand in this type of coordination mechanism. For example, we could think about for future research, is there additional value from incorporating information about local network constraints into the sorts of price signals that are embedded in a virtual energy network? Are there great benefits from providing really granular real-time information on the availability of, for example, electricity in a local network? Are there substantial benefits from, in addition to the virtual energy network, providing targeted peak reduction incentives to lower the strain on the grid during times of peak demand. Just before I wrap up, it's always important to note some of the limitations of the research. And of course, there are always many. As I said, this is a very credible causal estimate of the effect of the virtual energy network, but there are limitations. One of them being it's a very short run trial. We've been running the trial for almost a year, but even that is still a pretty short run trial when you think about the time horizons over which people make decisions like investing in an electric vehicle. So if access to a virtual energy network changes those longer term decisions, that's something we're not able to understand in our study design. And of course, there are some other limitations of a study that I won't go into too much detail at this point in time. But I want to just leave you again with that message that we do have great technology available to us, software technology in this instance, that already does a lot to better coordinate and integrate consumer energy resources, and that is beneficial to both owners of current hardware, like consumer energy resources, but also those who, for a variety of reasons, actually haven't been able to invest in those consumer energy resources. And as I hand back to PK, just once again, a huge thanks to all of the project partners in this study. It has been a mammoth effort, and we include in our project partners all of our fantastic Deakin Venners, our study participants. A huge thanks to you all, and I hope that we've all learned something valuable from the study experience. I'll hand back to you, PK.
It's really great to see the effect of individual behavior change happening, because that's something that we've tried to help people alongside. We have three guests on our panel today. We have Michael Dello-Iacovo. He's a manager of network innovation at TransGrid and formerly served as the executive manager of advocacy and policy at Energy Consumers Australia. He holds a PhD in geophysics from the University of New South Wales, Sydney, and has a keen interest in how innovative technologies can deliver better outcomes for energy consumers. He's excited by the possibility that virtual energy networks hold for consumers facing barriers to participating in this energy transition. Joining us also is Craig Reucassel. He's currently with ABC Radio Sydney, but he has done things in the past like the War on Waste series in 2017 and the 2018 Fight for Our Planet Climate Challenge. He is one of the original Chaser crew. So Craig has a keen interest in fighting for this planet. He's also a WEN user himself, so he brings a bit of background here. Lastly, we have Lisa Cowgill from Enosi, who's appearing on behalf of the solution provider as an insider on all things WEN, which is extremely valuable for this forum. She'll be able to help the discussion where the product, the practice research, and potential future growth in this area is involved. Lisa has spent many years in software development and teaching. I'm an ex-teacher myself. And she's based in Sydney and devotes her time to Enosi now. I would like to open this up to our panel here to share the reflections or any questions they may have. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Andrea, for that presentation. Really cool to see the study come together and see the results. I've been involved in a small way earlier in the study, and it's been a long time coming. Really exciting to see. For me, I think the reason why I've been so excited in seeing this study and virtual energy network in general is Australia is a world leader in solar and has been for a while, and we're increasingly becoming a world leader in home batteries as well. But there are a number of people who face various barriers to being able to participate in the energy transition. The energy transition comes with a lot of benefits for people who can get rooftop solar and can get batteries and can make changes to their home so that they can reduce their energy costs. But for some people, like the 31% of dwellings in Australia are rentals. Renters don't own the roof over their head, so they have challenges. They can't put rooftop solar on their own roof. There's a split incentive where the landlord doesn't necessarily have incentive to put solar on their roof. We've got 16% of dwellings are apartments. Also, you have challenges there. Even if you own your own apartment, you don't own the building. You have to deal with strata. Some people can't necessarily afford the upfront costs of purchasing a solar and or a battery unit. So having something like the virtual energy network and other solutions, really exciting because it means more people can participate in the energy transition, participate in those benefits. And just last thing I'll add for now is that last question or the last research question about how does participation in the event affect people's perspectives on the energy transition, I think, and things around how they support the energy transition. But I think that is important as well, because we talk a lot about social license in the energy transition. And if we don't bring everyone along on the journey with the energy transition and make sure that as many people as possible, ideally everyone, has experiences the benefits of the energy transition, we won't have the buy-in from the public, from everybody, to make sure that we can achieve that transition. Yeah, thank you. That's all I'll say for now.
Thanks, Michael. I did have a question. It's around transparency and access. People have talked about the difficulties with accessing plans like this, accessing other people's solar. And it's actually great that the wind product is out there trying to make it happen. How can we make this simpler? How can we make this more accessible to people so that they can actually get on board and participate? What's the future? I guess that's a little bit more a question for Lisa.
Definitely one of the things that from the study itself that Enosi has definitely learnt is that as a community program, the Deakin Venn study really benefited from coordination, and not from just the aspect of the technology doing the coordination for in terms of trading and when and how much for people were buying and selling, but more about the coordination of the community as a group. It was really beneficial, I think, to see the information sharing and in terms of helping our participants with their trades. And a lot of the complexity was taken out and coordinated from the teams, from the study team, rather than from a lot of the participants themselves. Although participants, of course, can and could alter trades and add trades, delete trades, and trade with others, even outside the study, which was great to see as well. I think a key to this question is to making a simple customer value proposition. So coming from the retailers as well, in terms of their plans and energy plans that offer this sort of facility. And Enosi have got other projects in activity at right now with that actually automatically set up trades for customers. But I think before that stage, it's really about making it easy to understand, making it easy to access for all the customer base out there.
So I'm just here as a mug punter who's used this, been part of this scheme. So I guess I'll give them a view. I'm reasonably engaged with this, and I'm one of the people that has solar and batteries. So it's interesting, actually, when the question was posed about did it change your behaviour, I was like, not at all. I don't think it changed my behaviour at all. And I realised then when we heard Andrea's description, it's that the behaviour was changed on people who haven't got solar and batteries. So it's like when I first got solar, I changed my behaviour and tried to shift when I did things and use the stuff during the day. And so by doing this, it shifted that behaviour to people that didn't necessarily have it. So that's really interesting to see that was actually done. So I think that's a successful thing from this. Does it change how you feel was one of the other questions. And I think it was interesting. One thing for taking this forward would be understanding who you're sharing with, who it's going to. There's a human element to this. I know when we've tried to set up, we looked at doing a local network once in a little town, and everyone was obsessed. Where's my bit of electricity going to? Even though electricity you can't track like that. Am I getting my electricity back, or is it going to the person next door? And I found that just from a human perspective, the part where I was most excited by this was when I discovered that a lot of my energy I was trading was going to a little cafe in Mossvale. And I was like, oh, these people are getting it. And I had this kind of feeling of the human side of it. So that was really a positive aspect to this, that it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't matter whether I put it in the grid or goes to the cafe or whatever, but it's interesting how that actually made me feel differently about it. I think on the benefit side, and I'd see there's a few comments on this front, from a financial perspective, I don't know whether I'm ahead or behind. It was very difficult to track that because of the complexity of how much you were trading for, how much was actually still had to be paid, the network cost, like the 16 whatever cents, that was really hard to track and really hard to cover. And because of the subscription model of Energy Locals, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that I found that I understand that they've got a subscription model so that they can explore interesting things like this Venn model and try to take it away from just paying per second and per whatever. Personally, I found it very hard to tell whether I was ahead or behind. And even though I had a kind of Powertracer credit come up on my bill, overall, I think, to be honest, I had two houses involved in this. The house I was exporting from, I think, probably was the same or behind. That one I was importing into was probably better, but it was very hard to tell. And I understand this is a test and it's a study and that kind of stuff, and everyone's come in. But I guess that question of how, and look, this is not necessarily the fault of Enosi or energy locals. It's the fault of our current energy system. The way in which we're charged for things, the way we've got multiple different numbers going on about different times of the day, different charges here. It is so complex for the average punter to engage with that it's no surprise that the most people that engage with this were fairly highly engaged electricity people already. But even within that category, I think it was quite complex from that perspective. But yeah, overall, really interesting just to see in the study that it did help. And by the way, I think that it's no small achievement to have got a study that has helped people in rental, for instance, get some of the benefits of the solar revolution otherwise and change their behavior and get some of the financial benefits of that, because I've been watching this area for ages, and Victoria brought in things which are meant to help renters. Didn't really work. So many different models have come in to try and help renters, and it's been really hard. So this is interesting that this did have some success on that front, but yeah, more to do, but heading in the right direction.
Definitely some really good points there, Craig. And yeah, in regards to this specific study with Energy Locals as the retailer, it is a constraint in terms of the plans that they offer and their fee structures. Definitely, and up 100% the energy market and all the numbers and whatever, it's very hard to navigate. Powertracer does expose a bit of that in terms of what's tradable and what's not. So it's definitely something that Enosi is definitely aware of and taking to other products and ideas. So just as an example, we have a product that we have been running in Italy for quite a while now called Adopt a Panel. And basically customers sign up all over Italy. We've got about 65,000 customers at the moment, and they sign up and they rent a panel from a solar farm and they pay about €5 a month and they get free energy for that from that panel for that month, and they pay €5 and everything else on top of that is free. So as an example of taking out the complexity, taking out, and just in terms of what that retailer's decided to do, and completely different plan and fee structure is just as an example, but just as an example of what the sort of things that Powertracer can do, the sort of things that technology can do in the hands of different retailers in different markets. So I thought I'd just mention that one.
Can I make a comment on the complexity part? It's fair that some people don't want to be trading energy or thinking about their energy use in that way. And from some Energy Consumers Australia survey data, about 60% of households say that they don't want an active relationship with their energy bill, with the energy system. They just want to pay a good price for electricity. They want it to be fair. They want reliable supply, good customer service. With that in mind, something like the VEN is not necessarily for everyone. But on the other hand, 3/4 of Aussies say that they would be willing to change when they use energy or use less energy at certain times to receive benefits. And those two things might seem inconsistent with each other, but I think what it highlights is if you can make things simple enough and you can communicate them, most consumers are willing to change their energy behavior, their energy use to benefit their wallet, but also benefit others, to benefit the environment. And so, yeah, I think that point around how do we make it simple, what's the next version of this, is really important, because for some people, they will want to optimize their trades and get really into it. Some people won't, but they still feel like there's something they want to do. So maybe it's the VEN works for the more engaged customers. You want something else maybe for the customers who are willing to do something, but not be that level of engaged.
Yeah, look, I couldn't have done this without the help of Aidan Moore and Chris McGuigan. They were amazing in terms of what they helped me with. And it's interesting though, because you'd set up various trades. In a way, is that something that you don't need to know? You just need to be saying, you go, anything extra I have, anything that I'm exporting, I can trade. Anyone can buy it. And then other people are going, I'll buy any time something's cheaper. That's literally all I need to know. From a cost perspective, that's all I need to know. And I wonder if really the things, if you think about people who are motivated by this, there's a couple of different things. There's always cost motivations are really powerful in this area. The second thing is people who are motivated by the environmental aspect. People who go, I live in an apartment, I can't get solar, I don't have the option of renting a solar panel like they do in Italy. So what I want to do is feel like I'm using somebody else's solar. I'm getting solar from someone. So if you really had a thing of going, if you had a kind of an app that just said to you, hey, you've shared this much solar with other people this week and get rid of this many emissions because of that. And those people said, you've used this much solar from other people's panels rather than using something else from the grid. That would sum that up. And then I guess I just think of going, you've saved this much, you've saved that much. Now, I know it's hard because obviously, what are you comparing to? You're comparing to the grid, and the grid, depending on what rate of solar at the time, it's different emissions and all that kind of stuff. But something simple like that kind of really just allows people to distill it down to the simple thing of like, how much am I saving? How much am I using of solar energy or otherwise?
So if I could just come back to thinking about what are the benefits of events. I think, Craig, you made a great point that there's environmental motivations, there are community motivations, as well as just purely getting cheaper power. But one thing that we've tried to do in the study, and it'll be in the full report, is actually break down the two separate benefits from the event. One is that, yes, you get it for the same amount of electricity consumption, you get a cheaper price. That's great. Everybody wants to save money. But the other thing we observed is that people do consume more electricity, right? So they're actually getting benefit from consuming more electricity during the times when this free, from the planet's perspective, low cost and zero emission energy is available. And so just purely comparing based on what is my bill going to look like doesn't capture that additional benefit of actually getting better access to cheaper power and potentially using more, which is something that's particularly the case for renters or for people who are otherwise constrained in a cost of living crisis.
And that's what I'm most thrilled about in this study. I've only discovered this now while you're giving this. Obviously, we're at the end, but it's like knowing that this has allowed that behavior change of people using energy in the day when it's coming from solar, it's coming from wind, it's coming from that kind of thing is fantastic. So that's been really successful. So knowing that's been able to transport that behavior change that people with solar have to people that don't have solar is awesome. I think that's a huge win. And I'm thrilled. That alone means I'm thrilled to have been involved in this, to be honest. It's a really big achievement.
Yeah, so we are writing the preliminary report right now, and we'll talk to our participants. We'll provide our participants both with the link to that report and give them some more information as a part of the wrap up of the study. So please, if you are a participant, watch out in your inbox for an email from the team. I did see one other question, PK, that I thought is somewhat topical. So the federal government's obviously proposed providing free energy as part of the retail pricing plans to consumers. And the question was, would that be more beneficial? Look, I think certainly the results of our study might suggest that type of plan is beneficial. I think one thing that the virtual energy network does above and beyond that type of pricing structure is that it links the prices to availability of actual output. And so one downside of just creating these blanket rules is that there are plenty of days where it's cloudy and there might not be a huge amount of excess solar. And so one thing that the virtual energy network does is it actually links those signals to something that's actually happening in the market, and that's the availability of excess solar. And that could be localized. For example, there could be local pockets where there's excess. So in that sense, it is potentially a more useful signal, a more informative signal about kind of the state of the market.
Can I ask a question on that front? And I may not have been as across the detail as the user every second here, but how were people notified that today there's heaps of solar, you should be using stuff now, or today there's not so much, maybe save a bit? Were people notified through Facebook, through an app, through email, did they have to log in, or what was the...
I guess Lisa's the best person to talk about what information the Powertracer system provides. But from the study's perspective, we did have 2 periods within the study window where we did send some text messages to some of our participants saying that tomorrow is going to be a really high solar day. So a forecast based on some existing forecasts of solar output, but there wasn't any live kind of hour by hour information. Powertracer itself provides you with heaps of information in terms of what's happened from your smart meter data historically. It's not designed to be a live real-time information provider.
It's using the smart metering data that we receive. So that's already happened, but it processes that and therefore conducts the trades. But yeah, it doesn't have any live feed in terms of forecast or pricing signals, things like that. No.
And I guess that was one of the things future research could think about is, are there additional benefits from that sort of information? I think one of the really fantastic things is that Powertracer is using the existing technology. So it is using our smart meters that, for example, in Victoria, everybody already has, and in many other parts of the NEM, people are getting. And so it doesn't require any additional hardware on top of that. Yeah.
So there's help available. I highly suggest get on the Facebook group, start helping yourself. If you want to keep using the WIN and get more out of it. And one thing I would like to share very quickly is an offer from our partners at WinZero WIN. And I know there were a few questions in the chat that asked pretty much the same question. You are invited to keep this going. If you want to join the WinZero WIN to be part of the community, email us at info@winzero.com.au. And we will try our best to get back to you and help facilitate joining the WinZero WIN community. And we really want to thank everybody who participated in the study. Thank you.
Thank you.